It started with a dying cow, then a poisoned stream, and before we knew it, bullets were flying to the farmhouse window. My sister's land wasn't just a farm. It was a key to exposing a crime so big. The FBI had to step in. But the real question is, just how far would they go to bury the truth? At first, we thought it was just bad luck. Then the milk turned sour, the cows started dying, and the bullets came flying through our window. Someone wanted my sister's farm gone. But when the FBI got involved, we uncovered a truth more terrifying than we ever imagined. You won't believe what happened next. Stay tuned. I knew something was wrong the moment I pulled into my sister's driveway. The usual comforting sounds of her small dairy farm. Cows lowing in the distance, farmhands calling to each other, were missing. Instead, there was only silence. A silence that felt too thick, too unnatural. As I stepped out my truck, Emma rushed toward me. Her blonde hair was disheveled, her eyes red-rimmed from crying. "Thank God you're here," she said, voice shaking. "Bella's sick, really sick." Bella, Emma's prize Jersey cow, the very heart of her small but growing dairy business. My stomach dropped as I followed her to the barn, where Bella lay on her side, her caramel-colored coat slick with sweat. She was struggling to breathe, her sides heaving in distress. Dr. Patel, the vet, was already there, kneeling beside her, his expression grim as he took samples. He barely glanced up at me. "How long has she been like this?" I asked. "Just since this morning," Emma whispered. "She was perfectly fine yesterday." Dr. Patel stood up, wiping his hands on his jeans. "This isn't a normal illness," he said carefully. "I don't want to jump to conclusions, but I need to send these samples to the lab. Until then, separate Bella from the others. And, Emma," he hesitated, "you might want to halt milk sales for now." Emma flinched as if he had struck her. "I can't afford that," she murmured. That was when she handed me the letter, a thick, cream-colored envelope with a Paradise Gardens HOA logo stamped on it. I scanned the contents. A buyout offer. No, the 5th buyout offer. "They've doubled the price since last time," Emma muttered. "It's the last piece of land they need for their expansion." I clenched my jaw. "And if you don't sell?" Her gaze darkened. "Karen Winters came by yesterday. She said my cows were lowering their property values. Then she told me, one way or another, this farm won't be running much longer." My grip tightened around the letter. Karen Winters, the HOA president. I glanced at Bella, her breath coming in ragged bursts. Was this really just an unfortunate coincidence? Or was it something far worse? Later that afternoon, as Emma napped from exhaustion, I took a walk along the fence line that separated her farm from Paradise Gardens. The difference was jarring. On one side was Emma's organic, hard-earned land, rolling pastures, rustic barns, the honest smell of earth and livestock. On the other, perfectly manicured green lawns, matching beige houses, and a gated entrance with an iron fence too polished to belong here. As I stared through the bars, I heard the crunch of footsteps on pavement. A woman in expensive yoga attire, blonde hair cut in a severe bob, strode toward me from inside the fence. "You can't stand there," she snapped. I turned slowly. "I'm on my sister's property." She arched an eyebrow. "You're peering into our private community. That's harassment." I didn't need an introduction. "Karen Winters. I assume you're Emma's brother." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "It's unfortunate she's being so unreasonable. She doesn't want to sell. That's her right." Karen's expression didn't change, but her voice did, softer, colder. "Well, let's just say that the county has become very strict about health inspections for dairy farms. Small businesses have such trouble keeping up with regulations, don't they?" A chill ran up my spine. Before I could reply, a security guard in a golf cart pulled up behind her. "Is there a problem, Mrs. Winters?" Karen barely glanced at me. "This man is trespassing." I folded my arms. "I'm standing on my sister's land." Karen waved a dismissive hand. "The fence line isn't exactly where she thinks it is." I watched as she turned her back and strolled away, humming to herself. I had no proof yet, but my gut told me this wasn't over. That night, Emma and I sat in her dimly lit kitchen, the silence between us heavy. Her phone buzzed. She put it on speaker. I rushed the test results. Dr. Patel said, "Emma, someone poisoned your cow." A cold weight settled in my chest. "What?" Emma breathed. The sample contained a chemical found in industrial cleaners, not something a cow could ingest naturally. Emma's face paled. "I've already contacted the county agricultural office. You need to report this. And Emma, you need to be careful." We barely had time to process this before a loud noise outside made us both jump. Through the kitchen window, I saw two figures running from a barn, disappearing into the darkness beyond the fence. We rushed outside. The milk storage tank lid was open. "Don't touch anything," I warned, grabbing Emma's arm. "We need to call the police." As I stepped back, something crunched under my foot. A plastic bag weighed down with a rock. Inside was a note. "Sell now or watch everything you love wither away." Officer Jenkins, a tired-looking man in his 50s, sighed as he flipped the note between his fingers. "I understand you're upset about your cow," he said lazily, "but you're accusing the Paradise Gardens HOA of, what, attempted property sabotage." "Yes," I snapped. He shrugged. "You got actual proof?" Emma clenched her fists. "They've been harassing me for months. Then my cow is poisoned. Now we find a threatening note. Correlation isn't causation, ma'am." He handed the note back to me. "I'll file a report, but without clear evidence." He left. Emma sank into a chair, defeated. "They're going to get away with it." I grabbed her hand. "No, they're not." The next morning, while Emma met with the county inspector, I went into town and bought security cameras. I set them up at key locations, near the milk tanks, the barn, the cattle water troughs, and most importantly, along the fence line shared with Paradise Gardens. That night, the first motion alert pinged on my phone. Emma and I watched the live feed as a man in a security uniform scaled a fence and walked onto her property. "That's George Michaels," Emma whispered, "Karen's right-hand man." We held our breath as he approached the cattle's water trough. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, unlabeled bottle. I hit the alarm button. A loud siren blared across the farm. George jumped, dropped the bottle, and ran for the fence. I sprinted outside, heart pounding, and found the bottle lying in the dirt. Under the moonlight, I read the faded label. Industrial descaler. Poison. This time we had proof. And this time, the police wouldn't be able to look away. The flashing red and blue lights cast eerie shadows over the farm as Detective Maria Lopez stepped out of her squad car. Unlike Officer Jenkins, she actually looked like she gave a damn. Emma and I stood beside her as she examined the security footage on my phone. "This is clear evidence of criminal trespassing and attempted poisoning of livestock," she said, her jaw tightening. Her partner, Officer Daniels, returned from where he had collected the poison bottle, sealing it in an evidence bag. "It's labeled industrial descaler. Highly toxic." Detective Lopez nodded. "We'll bring George Michaels in for questioning immediately." Emma let out a breath of relief. Finally, as officers escorted George away in handcuffs, Karen Winters arrived in a sleek black BMW, stepping out in a designer pantsuit and an expression of pure fury. "This is outrageous," she barked, marching toward Lopez. "You're arresting my security officer? For what?" "Try and protect our community." Lopez didn't even flinch. "Your security officer was caught on camera sneaking onto private property and attempting to poison livestock." Karen scoffed, crossing her arms. "George was conducting his own investigation. We've suspected Emma of illegal farming practices." Lopez's eyes narrowed. "With poison?" Karen's smile didn't reach her eyes. Perhaps he panicked. "Either way, this is a misunderstanding." I stepped forward, unable to hold back. If this is a misunderstanding, why did he run? Karen's gaze snapped to mine, cold and sharp. "You have no idea who you're dealing with," she hissed. Before I could reply, George spoke from the squad car. "Karen, Don't say another word," she cut him off sharply, her voice as crisp as glass breaking. I didn't miss the way her fingers clenched into fists. George wasn't just a security officer. He was a pawn, and he had just been sacrificed. Karen turned on her heel and left. That should have been the end of it, but it was just the beginning. The next morning, Emma sat across from me at the kitchen table, staring at the cancellation emails on her laptop. "The Green Valley Grocery just dropped me," she whispered. "They've been carrying my milk for 2 years." My stomach turned. "Did they say why?" She hesitated. "Someone told them my farm is under investigation for contamination." I clenched my jaw. "Karen," Emma exhaled shakily, rubbing her temples. "If this keeps up, I'll be bankrupt in a month." I tapped on my phone, checking our security cameras. That's when I saw the notification. Motion detected, 2:14 a.m. I clicked on the footage. A black SUV idled just outside the farm's fence line. The driver's side door opened, and a man in dark clothing stepped out. He didn't enter the property. Instead, he dumped something into the stream that ran directly into Emma's cattle pastures. My blood ran cold. I stood so fast my chair scraped against the floor. "They're poisoning the water." Emma turned, eyes wide. "What?" I grabbed a flashlight and sprinted outside. The small creek ran along the far side of Emma's property, originating from Paradise Gardens. As I shone my light over the surface, my stomach dropped. An oily, rainbow-colored sheen floated on top of the water. I crouched down, taking a sample in a glass jar. Emma was right behind me, her breath catching. "What the hell is that?" "Proof," I muttered. And this time, they weren't just after her cows. They were after her entire farm. By the next afternoon, Detective Lopez had sent an environmental services team to Emma's farm. 2 men in hazmat suits collected water samples while Emma and I stood with Lopez, watching from the fence line. One of the technicians turned to us. We confirmed chemical contamination. Emma's hands clenched into fists. "Can you trace it back to Paradise Gardens?" The technician exchanged a look with Lopez. "We have reason to believe the source is upstream, but legally, we need further testing before making an official claim." Lopez sighed. "In the meantime, I suggest you both be extra careful." I shook my head. This is bigger than a local investigation. Karen is connected to county officials. The police aren't going to be enough. Lopez raised an eyebrow. "What are you suggesting?" I exhaled. "The FBI." She was silent for a moment. Then she nodded. "I'll make the call." That evening, as Emma and I reviewed our security footage, my phone buzzed with a notification. Unknown sender. I opened the email. Subject, concerned citizen. Attachment, HOA meeting minutes, urgent. I clicked the file. Inside was a scanned document from a recent Paradise Gardens HOA board meeting. One section stood out. Finalizing the Reynolds problem. Water supply compliance. The minutes were signed by Karen Winters, George Michaels, and a county official named Richard Lawson. Emma leaned over my shoulder, reading the words. Her voice was a whisper. "They planned this." I forwarded the email to Lopez. Then I dialed her. She picked up on the first ring. "Detective," I said, "I think we just found our smoking gun." The next morning, I woke to the sound of car doors slamming outside. Peering through the window, I saw them. 3 black SUVs. The letters FBI glinted in the early morning light. A tall woman in a dark suit stepped out, flashing a badge. "I'm Special Agent Wilson. Are you Emma Reynolds?" Emma nodded slowly. Wilson's expression was unreadable. "We've been monitoring Paradise Gardens HOA for some time." My heart pounded. "For what?" Wilson exchanged a look with another agent. Then she turned back to us. "For financial fraud, money laundering, and now, possibly, attempted murder." Emma's face went pale. "Murder?" Wilson nodded. "Your farm sits on key land they need. Without it, their entire operation falls apart." I exhaled sharply. "So this isn't just about expansion?" "No," Wilson said, her expression darkening. "It's about covering up crimes." As she spoke, FBI agents began unloading evidence bags and technical equipment. Emma's eyes flicked to me, fear and determination in equal measure. "This is bigger than I ever imagined," she whispered. I squeezed her shoulder. Then we fight. Wilson turned to her agents, set up surveillance. Then she faced us. Stay close, because this is about to get dangerous. Special Agent Wilson and her team had set up their command post inside Emma's farmhouse. The dining table was now covered with maps, files, and surveillance equipment. The weight of what we had uncovered was pressing down on all of us. Emma sat across from me, her hands clenched together so tightly her knuckles were white. "This is my home," she whispered. "My dream, and they're trying to destroy it." I reached for her hand. "Not if we stop them first." Before she could respond, a loud banging came from the front door. Miguel, one of Emma's farmhands, burst in, breathless. "Miss Emma, it's the cows, the ones in the west pasture." Emma's face paled. She ran outside, and I followed. What I saw nearly stopped my heart. 5 cows staggered, struggling to stand, their legs trembling beneath them. Their eyes rolled, and foamy saliva dripped from their mouths. Dr. Patel was already on site, crouched beside one of them. "It's the same symptoms as Bella," he said grimly. "But this time it's worse." Emma gasped, covering her mouth. "How?" "We've been watching everything." That's when I noticed something. A service truck from Paradise Gardens Water Authority had been parked just beyond Emma's property line for hours. My chest tightened. The stream. I ran toward it, Emma right behind me. The oily sheen that I had seen before was now thicker, a sickly blue-green tint swirling in the water. The poisoning hadn't stopped. It had escalated. By nightfall, the FBI's environmental team confirmed the worst. Agent Wilson placed a file on the table in front of us. "Lab results just came back," she said. "There's industrial pesticide in your water supply. High concentration. Enough to cause organ failure." Emma's hand shook. "You mean they're trying to kill my animals?" "They're trying to shut down your farm," Wilson corrected. "If enough cows get sick, the county health department will force you to cease all dairy production indefinitely." Emma looked at me, her face full of desperation. "I can't fight this. Even if we prove it's them, I won't survive the bad press." "That's exactly what they want," Wilson said. I clenched my fists. "We need something bigger than just water samples." That's when my phone buzzed. A new email. Subject: "You need to see this." I opened the attachment. My blood ran cold. A recording. I hit play. Karen's voice crackled over the speakers. "It's simple. We control the water board. A few routine maintenance procedures upstream, and the farm goes under. When it does, we swoop in with another offer. She'll have no choice but to take it." Emma's breath hitched. Agent Wilson snatched my phone. "Where did this come from?" I shook my head. "Anonymous." Wilson's eyes darkened. Karen must have made enemies in her own community. She turned to her team. "We're bringing her in." 2 hours later, Karen Winters was sitting in an interrogation room. She still looked polished, dressed in a designer blazer and perfectly applied makeup. But there was an unmistakable flicker of fear in her eyes. Agent Wilson paced in front of her, dropping a thick folder on the table. "Let's talk about the contaminated water, Karen." Karen crossed her arms. "I don't know what you're talking about." Wilson smiled coolly. "You don't?" She pulled out my phone and played the recording. Karen's face twitched. "That's not me," she said quickly. Wilson smirked. "You sure? Because we also have financial records showing Paradise Gardens HOA making large donations to the county water board." She slid the documents across the table. Karen swallowed. "This is ridiculous. You can't prove I—" "We can," Wilson interrupted. "And guess what? George Michaels is already talking." Karen froze. I leaned forward, watching her expression shift. She had always been in control. But now she looked trapped. I had barely stepped out of the interrogation room when Wilson's phone rang. Her face changed as she listened. Then she turned to me. "You need to come with me." Emma and I followed her outside, where a second FBI agent was waiting. He held a yellowed envelope. This was recovered from an anonymous tip. Wilson pulled out the contents. My stomach twisted. It was a 15-year-old photograph. Karen Winters, standing beside a man in a suit. and between them was Emma's late husband, Thomas Reynolds. Emma's breath caught. W.Y. is my husband in that picture. Wilson's lips pressed into a thin line. This is what we didn't tell you earlier. Emma's face paled. Your husband didn't die of natural causes. Silence. Then Emma whispered, What? Wilson's voice was gentle but firm. His cause of death matched the chemical poisoning in your water supply, the same one that killed your cows. The world tilted beneath me. Emma took a step back. No, that can't be. Wilson handed her another paper, a coroner's report. I read it over her shoulder. Toxic poisoning. Long-term exposure. Emma gasped. Wilson looked at her. Karen's been targeting your family for years. Emma's body shook, and then her expression changed, from shock to rage. They murdered my husband, she whispered, and now they try to kill me. She clenched her fists. I want them to pay. Karen had one last card to play. As the FBI prepared to freeze Paradise Gardens' assets, my phone buzzed one final time. A text. Unknown number. Watch your back. You have no idea how deep this goes. Before I could respond, the power in Emma's farmhouse suddenly cut out. A cold silence settled over the room. Then, crash. Glass shattered. Footsteps. Heavy. Fast. Get down. Wilson yelled. I grabbed Emma and ducked as gunfire ripped through the kitchen window. FBI agents returned fire, pushing us toward the back exit. Move. Now. We ran. We barely made it to Wilson's armored SUV when tires screeched behind us. A black sedan sped away into the night, but not before I caught a glimpse of the driver's face. Jackson Blackwood, Karen's son. Wilson turned to me, her expression dark and determined. They're desperate. I swallowed hard. They just tried to kill us. Wilson exhaled. That was a mistake. Her voice was cold, because now we bring the entire house down. The smell of gunpowder still lingered in the air. Emma sat beside me in the FBI's armored SUV, her hands shaking. She hadn't spoken since the attack. Wilson was on her radio, barking orders. We have a confirmed armed assault on a federal investigation. Suspect vehicle is a black sedan, registered to Jackson Blackwood. Pursuit is ongoing. I barely heard the words. The bullet holes in Emma's farmhouse window. The way we had hit the ground as glass shattered around us. The roar of gunfire. They had tried to kill us. I clenched my fists. No more running. No more waiting. Emma turned to Wilson. What do we do now? Wilson's eyes were sharp, unforgiving. We end this. At dawn, dozens of FBI agents swarmed Paradise Gardens. Their usual pristine streets and manicured lawns were filled with federal vehicles, their flashing red and blue lights casting long shadows. Neighbors peeked out from their curtains, some stepping onto porches in confusion and horror. But Karen Winters was nowhere to be seen. Wilson's team kicked open the front door to her lavish Tudor-style mansion. Inside, the place was a mess. Documents were scattered, drawers yanked open. She ran. I muttered. Wilson nodded, eyes scanning the room. She knew we were coming. Her partner, Agent Chun, lifted a shredded file from the floor. She tried to destroy evidence. I picked up a half-burned piece of paper. A name caught my eye. Richard Lawson. The county official on the water board. I murmured. Chin frowned. Looks like Karen had friends in high places. Then, a shout from outside. Got something. We rushed to the garage. An SUV's trunk was open, revealing stacks of cash. Thousands in small bills, stuffed into duffel bags. Wilson exhaled. She was funding something big. Then Chen's radio crackled. Suspect sighted. Black Mercedes. Heading west on County Road 17. Wilson's eyes flickered. Karen's tried to escape. She turned to me, and Emma. Stay here. This ends tonight. The black Mercedes tore down the highway, engine roaring as it weaved between cars. FBI vehicles followed in hot pursuit. Karen Winters sat behind the wheel, jaw clenched, knuckles white. The radio inside her car buzzed. Karen, stop the vehicle. You're surrounded. She slammed the gas pedal. Ahead, She spotted an exit toward an abandoned warehouse district. She took the turn. Big mistake. The moment she skidded onto gravel lot, a wall of black SUVs blocked the road. Karen slammed on the brakes. Too late. FBI agents surrounded the car, weapons drawn. Agent Wilson stepped forward. Karen Winters, step out of the vehicle. Now! Karen's hands tightened on the wheel, but she had nowhere to go. Slowly, she opened the door, stepping onto the pavement in her high heels and designer suit. This is a mistake, she hissed. Wilson didn't flinch. You're under arrest for attempted murder, environmental terrorism, conspiracy, and financial fraud. Karen laughed. A cold, bitter sound. You really think you won? She sneered. Wilson nodded toward one of her agents. He handed her a file. She opened it. Inside were bank records, emails, and the signed orders to poison Emma's land. Karen's face drained of color. Wilson smirked. Oh, she said, I think we did. By nightfall, Paradise Gardens was officially in chaos. Residents gathered in the streets, whispering as board members were led away in handcuffs. But one person was missing, Jackson Blackwood. We had seen him escape after the gunfire at the farm. And now, he was nowhere to be found. Emma stood beside me, arms crossed. He's hiding. Agent Chin approached. Or he's making a deal. I frowned. What do you mean? Chin handed me a document. I scanned it. My breath caught. Witness cooperation agreement, Jackson Blackwood. My head snapped up. He's flipping. Chin nodded. He wants immunity. Emma's eyes darkened. That coward. He's willing to testify that Karen orchestrated everything. The water poisoning, the fake inspections, even the murder of your husband. Emma stiffened. Chin hesitated. It's the final nail in the coffin, but it also means Jackson walks free. I turned to Emma. It's your call. She swallowed hard, then nodded. If it means Karen rots in prison, I'll take it. 3 months later, the courtroom was packed. Reporters lined the back, their cameras ready. Karen Winters sat at the defendant's table, dressed in a plain gray suit. She no longer looked powerful, no longer looked untouchable. She looked small. The judge's voice rang through the room. Karen Winters, you are charged with attempted murder, environmental crimes, conspiracy, and money laundering. How do you plead? Karen lifted her chin. Not guilty. A murmur swept through the courtroom. Emma sat beside me, her jaw tightening. Unbelievable. Then the doors at the back swung open. Jackson Blackwood walked in. He took the witness stand. Karen's face twisted with rage. And then he started talking. Jackson's testimony destroyed her. He detailed everything. How Karen had bribed county officials. How she had ordered the poisoning of Emma's farm. And then, the biggest bombshell. My mother was responsible for Thomas Reynolds' death, Jackson admitted. Gasps echoed. Emma gripped my hand tightly. Karen shot up from her chair. Lies, you little traitor. Sit down, Mrs. Winters. The judge ordered. Karen trembled with rage. But it was over. The jury deliberated for only 2 hours. The verdict? Guilty on all counts. Emma exhaled sharply. It was done. Karen was sentenced to 25 years in prison. Other HOA board members received sentences ranging from 10 to 20 years. Paradise Gardens HOA was officially dissolved. The residents? They voted to rename their community. Emma's farm was cleared of all contamination. Farmers donated cows to help rebuild. 6 months later, we hosted a grand reopening. Hundreds came. Neighbors. Customers. Even Agent Wilson and Chun. Emma stood beside me, watching the sun set over her fields. They tried to destroy us, she murmured. I squeezed her hand. And they failed. She smiled, because Paradise Gardens was gone. And Emma's farm? It was still standing. Stronger than ever. 6 months had passed since the trial. Paradise Gardens was no longer Paradise Gardens. After the HOA was dissolved, the remaining homeowners voted to rename their community. They rejected the toxic leadership of Karen Winters and her cronies, choosing something new, something fresh. It was now called Summerwood Estates. A fitting name for a place that had barely survived the winter of corruption. I drove past it one evening, the golden sunset casting long shadows over the newly renamed neighborhood. Most houses still stood, but something was missing. Karen's Tudor-style mansion had been bulldozed. No one wanted to live in a home where so many crimes had been planned. The lot sat empty, overgrown with weeds, a silent grave marker for an empire built on greed. Emma sat beside me in the passenger seat, staring at the ruins. She exhaled slowly. It still doesn't feel real. I nodded. It was never about just money for Karen. She wanted control. Emma looked down at her hands, and she was willing to kill for it. The words hung heavy between us. The past couldn't be erased. But at least, finally, it was over, or so we thought. A week later, Emma received a letter in the mail. No return address, just a single sheet of paper. The handwriting was cramped, uneven. You think you won. You think it's over. But there are things you don't understand. Things bigger than Karen. There was no signature. Just a final, cryptic message. Check the land records for your farm. Emma's hands shook as she lowered the paper. I took it from her, reading it again, my gut twisting. Who sent this? She whispered. I didn't know, but I knew where to start. The next day, I drove to the county clerk's office and requested the land records for Emma's farm. The clerk, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes, hesitated. That's an old file. She typed something into her computer, frowning at the screen. Then she got up and disappeared into the archives. She returned with a thick folder. I flipped it open. My blood ran cold. The first few pages were normal, documents confirming the farm had been in the Reynolds family for generations. But then I saw a second set of documents, buried deep in the file. Ownership transfer requests, dated 15 years ago, signed by Thomas Reynolds, Emma's late husband. I swallowed hard. He had tried to sell the farm before his death. I kept flipping. Then I found something worse. A handwritten note on official letterhead. Mr. Reynolds, we strongly encourage you to reconsider the sale. Failure to cooperate will lead to consequences. We trust you understand. No name, no signature. But the letterhead? Paradise Gardens HOA. My hands trembled. Thomas hadn't just been pressured. He had been threatened. And then, shortly after refusing, he had died. That night, I called Agent Wilson. She listened silently as I told her about the land records. When I finished, she let out a slow breath. I had a feeling we were missing something. I frowned. What do you mean? Wilson hesitated. Then she said something that made my stomach drop. Karen Winters wasn't the one who started this. I gripped the phone. What? Paradise Gardens was a front, Wilson explained. A shell organization. Someone else was behind the expansion plans. Someone with more power, more reach. I closed my eyes, the weight of realization settling in my bones. Karen had been ruthless, cunning, and manipulative, but she had also been a tool. A pawn in a much bigger game. Emma's farm was never just about land. It was about something bigger. Something that still wasn't over. 2 days later, Emma called me in a panic. There's a man at the farm, she whispered. He says he's from the bank. I grabbed my keys. I'm coming. By the time I arrived, a sleek black car was parked in Emma's driveway. A man in an expensive suit stood beside it, flipping through papers. His smile was practiced, his tone calm. Miss Reynolds, he said smoothly, I represent the interests of a private development group. We'd like to offer you a new deal. Emma's eyes hardened. I'm not selling. The man didn't flinch. I think you misunderstand. This isn't the same offer as before. He handed her a contract. My breath hitched. The offer was for 5 times the previous price. Emma didn't even look at it. She ripped it in half. The man sighed. That's unfortunate. He turned toward his car, opening the door. Then he looked back. His expression had changed. His fake smile was gone, and his eyes were ice cold. Do be careful, Miss Reynolds, he said softly. His gaze flicked to me. Both of you. Then he got into his car and drove away, leaving us standing in the dust. That night, as Emma and I sat on the front porch, staring out at the farm, I felt a deep unease settle in my gut. Karen was rotting in prison. The HOA was dismantled, but something bigger was still out there, watching, waiting. Do you think they'll come back? Emma asked quietly. I exhaled. I don't know. But deep down I did know. People like Karen, they were just symptoms of a larger disease. We had won this battle. But the war? It was just getting started. Emma took my hand. No matter what happens, we fight. I squeezed her fingers. Always. As the wind rustled through the fields, the stars shining bright and unbothered, I knew one thing for sure. They tried to bury us. But they didn't realize we were the roots, and we weren't going anywhere.